Hi, it's Tucker. Today I'm covering revenge deaths born out of a rage that people just couldn't let go of. From a woman who released a lion on her boss's property during a storm, to a father spending 2 years tracking the drunk driver who destroyed his family, ending his search with a confrontation that haunts me to this day. It was September 18th, 2019, a Wednesday night on a wooded property outside Broken Bow, Oklahoma. Severe thunderstorms swept across McCurtain County, which knocked out power lines, leaving the area in complete darkness. Paul Bennett was 52, and he was a luxury real estate investor and exotic animal collector. Online, he posted photographs beside rare servals, caracals, and hybrid jungle cats while boasting about his remote sanctuary. Locals knew the ranch existed, but very few had ever been inside it. Paul paid cash to anyone willing not to ask questions. I want to be real here. If I see a job like this with cool cash and less questions, trust me, I won't pass on it. One of the people working for Paul was 34 Lena Alvarez. She's divorced and struggling to support her elderly mother who suffered from severe kidney disease and heart complications. Lena operated a small delivery business using an aging refrigerated van to transport raw meat, antibiotics, sedatives, and maintenance supplies across southeastern Oklahoma. Paul contacted her through another supplier and quickly realized she needed money badly enough not to ask questions. At first, the arrangement seemed like a lifesaver. The weekly payments covered her mother's dialysis treatments, medications, and overdue bills. Because of that, Lena ignored the claw marks on steel cages and the growls coming from locked barns because the money kept her mother alive. Over time, Paul became careless and arrogant. He delayed Lena's payments for weeks, then months, while continuing to spend heavily on new fencing, imported animals, and expensive upgrades around the ranch. The unpaid debt eventually reached a large sum. Whenever Lena demanded payment, Paul insulted her and threatened to expose her involvement in the illegal operation if she continued pressuring him. By late August, Lena's mother's condition worsened after doctors discovered complications requiring emergency surgery and specialist treatment. Lena begged Paul for at least part of the money he owed her, reminding him she had protected his operation for years. Instead, he just paid some money that's nothing compared to what she was owed. 3 days later, her mother died in a regional hospital after treatment delays created serious complications. Lena barely spoke during the funeral. Hours later, she saw photographs Paul uploaded online showing exotic cats feeding on imported meat. Her mother is dying, and he's uploading photos of lions eating imported meat. I genuinely don't know what kind of person does that. From that point, Lena quietly began planning revenge. Despite everything, she continued delivering supplies because Paul's threats to report her to the main authorities made her afraid to leave the operation. On the evening of September 18th, she arrived at the ranch during the storm. Backup generators powered parts of the property, while rainwater flooded the holding areas. Several animals had been agitated for hours due to thunder and repeated electrical failures. After completing her delivery, Lena briefly assisted workers moving supplies before leaving. When no one was looking, she opened the main gate latch to the large cat enclosure. As the storm intensified, Paul moved through the darkened property, checking the enclosures with his torchlight. While walking through a service hallway near the damaged gate, he encountered an escaped lion inside the corridor. The animal had become highly stressed and disoriented by the storm and electrical failures. The lion slammed into Paul at close range, knocking him backward into the concrete wall. As he fell, the animal bit down on his shoulder and upper chest, dragging him several feet across the wet floor. Paul tried to shield his face and push himself away, but the lion struck again in a fast, chaotic burst, clawing and biting while he struggled beneath it. Neighbors heard loud animal noises, crashing metal, and screams before contacting authorities. Emergency responders discovered damaged fencing, blood trails, overturned equipment, and signs of violent struggle near the courtyard. Several animals were recovered roaming the ranch. Others escaped into nearby woodland and had to be euthanized. Because of the danger from surviving cats and unstable electrical systems, Paul's remains were not fully recovered until daylight. Investigators questioned Lena extensively after learning about the unpaid debt and her mother's death. The storm had destroyed most surveillance footage, and floodwater had contaminated fingerprints, but detectives remained convinced she was involved. No witness saw who opened the enclosure, and without physical evidence, they could not build a case. The investigation stalled. Lena later relocated and disappeared from public records. Lena opened a gate and walked away. The story I found next is different. This person sat on this plan for months before anyone announced that media event, and what he did next honestly surprised me. It was March 11th, 2017, afternoon, inside a packaging factory outside Cebu City in the Philippines. Television crews walked across the noisy production floor during a public event celebrating the company's expansion. Behind the cameras and speeches, workers watched the oldest machines with visible unease. Eduardo Ramirez was 60 and owned the factory. He cared more about production than safety. For years, workers complained about broken emergency shutoffs, damaged conveyor systems, and safety guards removed to run machines faster. Maintenance crews repeatedly warned that machines on line 4 had become unstable and dangerous, but little was done beyond temporary repairs. Workers who raised concerns were threatened with losing overtime. The worst accident happened in August 2016, when 29-year-old machine operator Marco Villanueva became trapped inside a defective roller assembly during a night shift. The emergency stop button failed when co-workers tried to shut the machine down. Marco survived after emergency surgery, but lost his right arm above the elbow. Over the following months, he publicly begged Eduardo Ramirez to improve safety inside the factory and provide compensation. Ramirez dismissed the criticism during interviews and blamed the accident on human error. He also fought parts of Marco's compensation claims in court, leaving him buried in medical debt while unable to work. Marco became deeply depressed from the pain, financial pressure, and humiliation. On November 18, 2016, he was found dead in his apartment, taking his own life. Rogelio Bautista was 50 and had worked at the factory for nearly 20 years as senior maintenance technician. Marco was his cousin and had helped him get the job and had personally filed many repair requests management ignored. After Marco's death, Rogelio became consumed with anger toward Ramirez. Let's be real here. I don't think Rogelio slept well for a long time. He obviously lost a family member in this same place that he has to show up for work every single day. That's a lot. In early March 2017, Ramirez announced a major media event to showcase the factory's expansion. Management planned to demonstrate the same unstable production line workers had complained about for months. Days before the event, during late-night maintenance inspection, Rogelio secretly disabled one remaining backup cutoff sensor connected to the emergency stop system. The change did not attract attention because inspections were poorly documented and many safety systems had already been bypassed or left unrepaired. On the afternoon of the event, Ramirez proudly guided his 18-year-old son Miguel across the factory floor while reporters followed. During the demonstration, a blockage formed inside the high-speed conveyor assembly, while Miguel stood beside the production line, speaking with reporters. Operators attempted to stop the machine. The system failed to respond. The jam caused overloaded rollers to misalign and shake violently as the conveyor continued running under pressure. A loud metallic crack split the air. Weakened mounting bolts snapped loose from a heavy steel guide rail. The rail tore free and struck Miguel directly, throwing him backward hard against the machinery platform. His body twisted as the rail hit his upper torso and head. He fell and struck the concrete floor. Debris scattered across the production floor. Reporters and employees ran for cover. Workers screamed for emergency shutdown as others rushed toward Miguel, but the damaged line continued moving for several more seconds before power was cut manually. Paramedics arrived after being called and rushed Miguel Ramirez to a hospital in Cebu City. Eduardo Ramirez was seen crying beside the ambulance, repeatedly begging rescuers to save his only son. He spent years ignoring every complaint about that machine. I watched a video once of a man begging outside a hospital, and I remember thinking, what did you think was going to happen? That feeling came back reading this. Despite emergency treatment, Miguel later died from severe blunt force injuries sustained during the machinery failure. After investigation, Rogelio was arrested and charged with sabotage, reckless homicide, and multiple criminal offenses. Authorities launched separate investigations into factory management and workplace safety violations tied to Eduardo Ramirez. The factory was shut down pending further proceedings. Rogelio touched one sensor and waited. The next one I found genuinely devastating. 2 years of watching the man who killed his daughter walk free, and it all came down to one bridge in Atlanta. It was the early morning of the 18th of September 2019 in Atlanta, Georgia. Police lights reflected across rain-soaked streets, while emergency crews surrounded the wreckage of a small sedan crushed against a concrete divider near downtown after a violent collision. Mason Ryder was 24 and the son of a wealthy property developer. He had spent the evening drinking at several bars before getting behind the wheel of his SUV. Surveillance footage confirmed Ryder was heavily intoxicated when he ran a red light and struck a vehicle driven by 18-year-old Skylar Bennett, a college freshman returning home from a volunteer event. The impact crushed the driver's side of her car and pushed it into a concrete divider. Skylar died at the scene before emergency responders could remove her from the wreckage. The loss completely destroyed Skylar's family. She had been the only child her parents were able to have after years of failed fertility treatments and multiple miscarriages. Friends described her as the center of their lives, especially for her mother, who had struggled emotionally for years before finally becoming a parent. Less than a year later, Skylar's mother was found dead at home following a severe mental health decline after Skylar's death, leaving Skylar's father, Adrian Bennett, a 47-year-old logistics manager, completely alone with unbearable grief. Although Mason Ryder was arrested for drunk driving, but he later avoided prison through a plea agreement negotiated by well-connected defense attorneys hired by his wealthy family. He received probation and temporary driving restrictions instead of a lengthy prison sentence. Adrian Bennett struggled deeply after the case concluded. He became emotionally unstable and consumed by anger after feeling justice had failed both his daughter and wife. He lost his family and justice didn't give him jail time. This is what we get when the system is broken, and I understand what it means to be helpless. It's not a funny place to be. Over the following 2 years, Adrian isolated himself from relatives and co-workers while becoming increasingly fixated on Mason Ryder and his daily routines. Adrian regularly followed Ryder around the city, including at restaurants, gyms, and clubs. Ryder eventually became aware Adrian was following him, and several hostile confrontations between the two men were later reported by witnesses and documented in police records. Phone records showed growing hostility and threatening language. On the night of July 11, 2021, Ryder attended a nightclub in downtown Atlanta before leaving shortly after 2 a.m. driving a large black pickup truck. Security footage showed Adrian Bennett leaving the same area in his sedan several minutes earlier. While traveling along Interstate 75 near downtown Atlanta, approaching an elevated overpass section, Ryder recognized Adrian's sedan driving ahead and accelerated behind him. Mason knew Adrian was out there watching him. He knew. And on that stretch of interstate, that tells me something about Mason Ryder that the trial probably didn't spend enough time on. Ryder uses his truck to strike the smaller vehicle repeatedly from behind at high speed. The truck's front end slammed into Adrian's rear bumper with violent force. The sedan shook and skidded forward. Ryder accelerated again and struck harder. Adrian lost control and the sedan spun across 2 lanes. Ryder's truck struck a third time, driving the sedan toward the guardrail. Adrian tried to correct, but the vehicle crashed through the weakened guardrail section and plunged into the rocky, shallow water below. The sedan hit rocks and water with tremendous impact. Adrian's body struck the steering wheel and windshield. Water rushed into the submerged vehicle. Emergency crews later recovered Adrian Bennett from the wreckage, but he died from severe traumatic injuries before reaching the hospital. After investigation, Mason Ryder was questioned, and he claimed the collision had been accidental. However, investigators reviewing vehicle data and surveillance footage discovered the truck deliberately accelerated several times immediately before impact, contradicting his account. Ryder was arrested and charged with the death of Adrian and multiple related offenses. Prosecutors argued he intentionally used his truck as a weapon after years of resentment and fear. He was convicted and sentenced to decades in prison. Adrian followed Mason for 2 years before that bridge. When I thought I had seen it all, the next story changed everything. She bought a ticket to Sydney, walked into a church during someone's wedding, and called his name at the altar. It was October 14, 2018, evening, inside a crowded church in Parramatta, Sydney, Australia. Guests filled wooden pews while soft music echoed through the building during the wedding ceremony. Fiona Blanco, who was 26, had spent 3 years with Frederick Chu, who was 30. Frederick on the outside appeared charming and successful, but behind closed doors, the relationship was abusive and controlling. He insulted Fiona at the slightest opportunity, monitored her movements, and became violent during arguments. One assault left her seriously injured and required surgery after several days hospitalized. Fiona finally left him and relocated to Melbourne to rebuild her life. Months later, Fiona found work at a finance firm and slowly began moving moving forward. Frederick became furious after discovering she had left him for good. During their relationship, he had secretly recorded intimate videos and private moments without her knowledge. Unable to locate her directly, he began uploading the recordings online anonymously and sending them to people connected to her personal and professional life. Co-workers discovered the material. The recordings spread through social media, private chats, and workplace gossip. Fiona begged Frederick over the phone to stop, but he continued distributing additional recordings. The harassment destroyed her life within months. Her employer pressured her to resign after co-workers and clients discussed the leaked material. She left an abusive relationship, rebuilt her life, got a job, and he followed her there with recordings. I want to be honest, toxic relationships never leave you the same. The stench follows you for a long time. Fiona struggled to find another job because the recordings continued circulating online. She became increasingly withdrawn and depressed as strangers mocked and harassed her through anonymous messages. Eventually, she was forced into unstable casual work while avoiding public attention. Nearly a year later, Fiona learned from an old acquaintance that Frederick was getting married. She traveled alone to Sydney several days before the ceremony. Investigators later believed she had obtained a handgun illegally through black market contacts, though the exact source was never confirmed. On the evening of the wedding, Fiona entered the church quietly while guests focused on the altar. As Frederick and his bride stood before the priest exchanging vows, Fiona walked down the center aisle carrying a handgun concealed inside her bag. Several guests initially assumed she was a late arrival until she stopped near the front rows and called Frederick's name. Gunshots was heard through the church. Fiona fired 4 times at close range. I keep thinking about the moment everyone in that church understood what was about to happen. But for real, was he really expecting a happily ever after? He must be dreaming. The first shot struck Frederick in the chest. She fired twice as he fell, hitting his bride in the abdomen and shoulder. Guests screamed and rushed toward the exits. Frederick collapsed onto the altar steps. His bride fell backward against the priest. Before anyone near the front could reach Fiona, she turned the weapon on herself and fired once. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Fiona and Frederick were transported to a hospital, where both later died from their injuries. His bride died in hospital several hours later. Investigators confirmed that Frederick had used several false identities online to hide his involvement, complicating efforts to remove the content and gather evidence. Fiona walked into that church alone. The next one I didn't want to add because of how unsettling it was, these 2 brothers. 9 months of planning, a marina, and a boat. This one changed how I think about loss entirely. It was the afternoon of the 14th of December, 2017, at a private marina near Cairns, Australia. Tourists walked along the docks, while dark storm clouds gathered over the Coral Sea during cyclone season. Despite repeated marine warnings, several charter boats still prepared to leave the harbor. Trevor Mallory was 48 and owned a charter company. He had built a profitable business offering private island cruises and sunset trips across the region. Former employees described him as reckless and obsessed with money during holiday season, often ignoring dangerous weather to avoid refunding customers. Local harbor authorities had already issued multiple storm warnings that day. Several experienced captains refused to operate tours because of dangerous wave forecasts and worsening conditions. Jacques, 32, and Kyle McGraw, 27, were newly engaged tourists from the United Kingdom. The trip was supposed to celebrate their engagement before returning home for Christmas. Several passengers asked staff whether conditions were safe before boarding. Heavy rain and strong winds had already begun hitting the marina. Employees were allegedly instructed to reassure customers that weather would clear once the boat reached open water. Multiple captains refused to go out that day. Trevor sent a 24-year-old deckhand instead and told staff to reassure the passengers. I don't have the words for that decision. Hours before departure, Mallory claimed he was too ill to captain the vessel and assigned 24-year-old deckhand Liam to operate the boat. Liam possessed only limited offshore navigation experience and had never captained a vessel alone during severe storm conditions. Shortly after leaving the marina, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Massive waves slammed against the vessel while visibility disappeared beneath heavy rain and violent winds. Passengers screamed as water crashed across the deck and the boat struggled to remain stable. Jacques attempted to shield Kyle as the vessel struck a reef and began taking on water. Distress calls were received less than an hour after departure before communication stopped. Rescue helicopters searched through the night. Wreckage was discovered the following morning scattered across reefs several kilometers offshore. All passengers and crew drowned, including Jacques and Kyle. Authorities launched a major investigation into the disaster. Witness statements, weather reports, and company records revealed that multiple storm warnings had been ignored before departure. Mallory faced possible criminal negligence charges, as families accused him of prioritizing profit over safety. Kyle's two brothers had confronted Mallory multiple times in the months afterward, blaming him directly for the deaths. Mallory showed little remorse and repeatedly blamed the victims for boarding the trip. In September 2018, Mallory disappeared after leaving the marina late one evening. His abandoned vehicle was discovered near a remote boat ramp north of Cairns. Kyle's brothers ambushed Mallory late that night near the isolated boat ramp after he arrived alone and forced him onto a rented small boat. Mallory was restrained and thrown into deep water miles from shore. He struggled against the restraints as cold ocean water filled his lungs, but he drowned. Phone records, marina surveillance footage, and GPS data from the rented boat connected the brothers to the disappearance. Both were arrested and charged. During trial, the court found out that it was a planned act of revenge driven by grief and anger over deaths caused by Mallory's reckless decisions. Kyle's brothers had 9 months in a plan. This last one is the most devastating in this entire episode. A 15-year-old who heard his grandmother fall down a staircase and 3 days later came face to face with the man responsible. It was the evening of 7th February 2016. Inside a deteriorating apartment complex in Newark, New Jersey, rainwater leaked through cracked ceilings while weak hallway lights flickered above damaged concrete staircases. Residents had spent months complaining about loose stair rails and unsafe conditions on the upper floors, where rusted metal supports had begun separating from the walls. Harold Vance was 61 and owned the property. He was widely disliked for ignoring maintenance complaints while increasing rent prices. Residents repeatedly warned that several stair rails had become dangerously unstable after years of water damage and corrosion. Elderly tenants complained the railings shook whenever pressure was placed on them. Building records showed Vance delayed repairs multiple times, claiming replacement would be too expensive. Former tenants described him as arrogant and dismissive whenever residents threatened lawsuits or contacted housing inspectors. Eleanor Brooks was 74 and had lived in the building for over a decade. After her daughter and son-in-law died in a highway accident years earlier, Eleanor became sole guardian of her 15-year-old grandson, Tyler Brooks. Neighbors described Eleanor as hardworking and protective, often taking small cleaning jobs around the neighborhood despite her age to support Tyler and keep him in school. Tyler was extremely close to his grandmother because she had raised him after his parents' deaths. On the evening of 7th February, Eleanor returned home carrying groceries during heavy rain after the building elevator stopped working again. She slowly climbed the staircase toward the 4th floor while balancing several shopping bags in her arms. As she reached a landing near the upper level, the rusted stair rail suddenly snapped away from the wall when she attempted to steady herself. Eleanor lost balance and fell down the concrete stairwell, striking each step hard before hitting the lower landing. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but Eleanor died from catastrophic head and spinal injuries before reaching the hospital. The incident devastated residents throughout the building, especially Tyler, who heard the fall and rushed into the hallway moments afterward. Days later, several tenants confronted Harold Vance outside the property demanding repairs and accountability. Vance mocked residents and dismissed threats of legal action, telling them old buildings were full of risks and accidents were unavoidable. He stood outside the building where his tenant just died from a railing he refused to fix and told people accidents were unavoidable. I genuinely cannot explain that level of detachment from what you've done. In the heat of the moment, Tyler Brooks suddenly pushed through the crowd and shoved Vance near the damaged staircase railing that still had not been fully repaired. Vance lost his footing and tumbled backward down the concrete stairs. His body struck the edge of each step as he fell, rolling and twisting. He struck the lower landing hard on his back and head before stopping. Several residents screamed and rushed downstairs while others called emergency services. Harold Vance died at the hospital from severe head injuries caused by the fall. Investigators reviewed witness statements and security footage before concluding Tyler had intentionally pushed Vance because of Tyler's age and the emotional trauma surrounding his grandmother's death. Prosecutors charged him in juvenile court, while defense attorneys argued years of grief and neglect contributed to the incident. The apartment complex was later condemned after inspectors uncovered dozens of major safety violations ignored for years.